Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Peaceful Solution Character Education Correspondence or Certification course. We'd like to welcome all of you that are watching here at our headquarters in Abilene, and also those of you that are watching around the world. Once again, we'd like to thank you for the questions you send in and for the participation that our audience has given us. And we'd like to remind you once again, because we still have people ask, how can they get the books to the Peaceful Solution Character Education program? And do they have to wait to get the books? And the answer is you can get them anytime you want, especially if you're overseas. If you'll just message us on the Facebook page there of the Peaceful Solution, the official Peaceful Solution Facebook page, we will gladly send you the PDF versions of all of our Peaceful Solution books. It's more important to get this information out into society. Here at the Peaceful Solution, we're not really in the business of selling books. We're in the business of teaching morality. And of course, we have to get the books in the hands of the people to make it easier to train and to become a teacher and learn to become a teacher. All the information are in these books, and these books are very helpful tools in helping bring peace and changing the hearts and minds to not just ourselves, but not just our local communities, but as a society as a whole. We see enough on the news about war and death and fighting, and it's really depressing to see the things that we see in society. But of course, we know we can make a difference. It's just going to take an enormous amount of effort to do so, but it is possible with all of us working together. So once again, thank all of you for joining us. We see your messages, so please make sure to keep sending them in. We look forward to addressing those messages and answering your questions. They're always welcome. So if you'll be turning over, once again, we're in the self-control unit. We finished up chapter 4, the last class, with what I have learned. And of course, that was applying self-control to interaction and communication. And tonight we're going to pick up where we left off in the last class, was the very beginning of chapter 5 of the self-control unit, which is maintaining your self-control. And if you remember all the way back to the character unit, we talked about what it meant to maintain our character and how we have to work at these things. And of course, it's like a car as it's compared to. You can't just get in it and drive and never do anything to, keep it in working order. You have to maintain. When something's growing a little weak, when something's getting a little worn, you got to make sure you adhere to that and pay attention to it. And the same things with our character. And of course, in the self-control unit, we learned about anger triggers so far and controlling our emotions and what exactly those triggers are. We've also discussed the difference between anger and rage and what it means to not actually control these negative emotions when they arise. When they come up, when controlled, they can be put into order and things can continue in a peaceful manner. But when left uncontrolled, and not dealt with, things can get out of hand very quickly. And as we've said many times in these classes, people can get killed. It literally is a life and death situation when we talk about morality. And we will get into that much more, learning how it is life and death situations that we see taking place before our very eyes. And I want you to think about something before we get into our lesson plan tonight. When someone says, how can we prevent school shootings? Or as took place in Philadelphia today or yesterday, the shooting in Philadelphia, the mass shooting. And then, of course, you have Buffalo. And you can name one city after the next city after the next city. It's an endless streak of violence. And, well, how can we do that? Well, if you remember back to the very beginning, every action begins with a thought. If we could change the way people think, put a more peaceful mindset into people, put a mindset of how to find a peaceful solution and still how to let the anger become uncontrolled and rage break out to where revenge is sought, this get even, fight back. Remember, the author of the Peaceful Solution learned at a very young age from his father, and he never forgot it, and it led to the creation of a huge character education program that now exists all around the world in many different countries. Here from our headquarters, it's always such a pleasant sight to meet with children in India and Nigeria and Kenya and Ghana, Mexico and Argentina and so forth, and Trinidad and Tobago, Jamaica. You can just keep naming the countries that we go into, even into the European countries. And it's always an honor to see how everyone can agree with this program that gets involved, and everyone sees the benefit of it. And of course, here in the United States, in all 50 states, the Peaceful Solution is taught and is also offered, once again, free online. But looking over here to LP5A. LP5A, that's our lesson plans, and remember, that's why you need a teacher's manual. Those are the grade tab pages that are only in the teacher's manual. And this note to the teacher is something the students won't see. This is for the teachers to get their mindset. And as a teacher, we're going to go over some things tonight, what it means to get our mindset. It isn't just reading through LP5A, but it means to go through it and then rehearse what we've read before in the units previously. And tonight we're just going to be going back, for time's sake, just to the character unit. But if you were doing a really nice preparation for the class, you'd pull in the acceptance unit and you would get your pages all lined out when you have the time to do that. But we just want to show a brief summary of what we're talking about tonight and moving forward. But starting back out with LP5A, it says, do you remember a time when much of what was on television was educational or family oriented? Today, you spend an average of almost 20 hours per week watching television programs that contain violence, sexually explicit scenes, and all forms of disrespectful behavior. And if you remember, I read a study that was presented from 2020 that shows most adults, not children, most adults have an average of 13 hours a day of media intake. Now, that doesn't mean it's always violent or explicit. I'll give you an example. I listen to a lot of Peaceful Solution classes all day long, and I'll let them play on my phone as I work, when I travel, and that's media intake. But that wouldn't necessarily be a negative thing, to be able to occupy your mind with things that are educational. That's something that would be a positive thing. So I'm not saying all media intake is negative, but when it contains violence where people are getting harmed, abused, killed, anything that's sexually explicit that goes into making it look like, here, you can do this and don't worry about the diseases, the reality of life itself, those things are very derogatory. Those things are very damaging, and those things are what lead to people, as you see here, these forms of disrespectful behavior, these scenes. When you don't understand the magnitude of the action that you're committing as an individual, you don't understand the consequences that it brings not only to your life, but to all the lives around you. And that's one thing we have to understand. We like to be sometimes very introverted kind of people, where we, in our thoughts anyway, where we only think about ourselves. But we have to realize when we make decisions as parents, as authorities, you can be a teacher, a guardian. When we make decisions, sometimes it takes a little bit of time before our decisions affect someone's life. Sometimes it's instantaneous. Like if your child asks, hey, can I go out and play? Well, no, you need to do your homework. Well, that decision was very instantaneous, and of course, it affected someone else's life. Now, of course, they might not like that, but once they get into the rhyme and reason and seeing why these things are more beneficial, not that you can't go out and play, but these things have to be done first. Could you imagine if the child come home and said, hey, I'm hungry, can I fix something to eat? No, I didn't go to work. I wanted to go out and play instead. So we don't have any money today. It would be very counterproductive. But this is something that we have to always focus on moving forward. Setting our goals, as we talked about in the acceptance unit, remembering what our goals are, writing them down. Remember, those people who succeed in accomplishing their goals, they write them down. And of course, moving forward. But we're talking about tonight the things that can actually sneak in a very kind of deceptive way, in a way that you laugh and you enjoy it, and everybody goes and, everybody's a kung fu expert when they're leaving the theater after watching a kung fu movie, or, you watch the latest, greatest, like Top Gun. I remember someone asked me here long ago, the new Top Gun movie coming out, and they said, hey, do you remember the Top Gun movie from back in the 80s? I was like, you know what? I do remember that. I remember driving by the theater that was close to my house and watching it be up there. It was like a year and a half it was running at the theater, which was an astronomically long time. And they said, well, what'd you think about the movie? I don't know. I've never seen it. I've never seen the movie. So I don't really know. I've seen advertisements about the movie, but I've never seen the movie. But I've heard people talk about when they come out, you get this like, you're all patriotic now and you're ready to go take on Russia or China, so to speak. And, it's like, well, that's great. But, if we go attack another country, is that really going to help all of us? Well, some people would want to debate that, but really get down to the very basics of what we're talking about here. Disrespectful behavior. I ask you, when we seen what took place in Uvalde, and I want you to consider this. We all consider the actions, I would think 100%. If I'm wrong in that, I could be wrong, but I would think 100% of people that seen what was done in Uvalde with the young man taking the lives of very innocent children and 2 teachers, I think everyone could agree that that was horrific and was wrong and should never be done. And then you hear the comments that people have about this young man that committed this act, and no one really knows yet why he did it. You can't see into the mind of somebody. You can try to guess. Your best way of seeing into the mind of somebody is watching their actions, because we know that the actions begin with thoughts. Well, what put those thoughts into the mind? That's when it gets complicated. But when you look at that young man that did a very horrific act, and you think about in Buffalo, the young man that committed that act, and other things that have taken place around the United States, just in general, the United States, what I'm speaking of right now, how do you think the United States is perceived when we bomb countries and it destroys schools and hospitals and kills families? It's almost like we don't understand that people look at us as a nation the same way that we view the young man that shot up the Uvalde school system. And we think that this hatred and retaliation is going to accomplish bringing at least satisfaction to our lives. We know it's not going to bring peace, but we can be satisfied with our choices we made. But are we really satisfied with them? Well, continuing on here, it says the programs not shown, including those programs during prime time, the programs now shown, me and a fly are not agreeing with each other right now, so the programs now shown, including those during prime time, are only one source of many influences affecting the moral character of our children today. Now, I want you to catch this as we're reading as teachers. We've read the word here, influence, and we read moral character. Now, we should be remembering that we read about influences on page 60. We read about moral character, if you remember that dividing line between right and wrong in the character unit on page 8. And we're going to get into looking at a few more things as we progress. But let these things be called to your mind as a teacher, because you're going to want these things called to your students' mind. You're going to want them to remember these very basic building blocks of character. And we'll go over and read a few of them here tonight. So what's on TV what TV hasn't accomplished, the internet, video games, and songs have. There's a grave concern about the negative influence media entertainment is having on our youth. Now, notice there's a negative concern, but there's not really anything being done about it. Nothing at all actually is being done about it when you look back, and if you think, wow, that music is really negative. But what do? Well, rights of free speech. If you want to sing about, destroying things and, doing things that bring disease and cursing people and saying very derogatory comments about people in music, and everybody can sing along. And we kind of forget that singing or music itself is a very important tool in education. I think most of us, when we learned our ABCs, we learned to do it by singing them. It's very common practice because music, I remember being in school when I was in kindergarten, first grade, and second grade, and they were teaching us to read. It was done with music and a little bouncing ball that went across the screen. And that's how they taught us to read books at a very young age. Well, when we hear these things take place, and it seems like every time I turn on my phone to see the news, it seems like there's a young rapper. I've seen another one today, and I'm not just specifically speaking about rap music in general, but I see an enormous amount of young rappers that they're putting on the news that has now died. And I read the articles, and some of them are kind of, it's heartbreaking to see that somebody died so quickly that really had a life ahead of them, but they died so quickly. Well, continuing on here, notice it said volumes of information are available in print, news coverage is steady, and many adults are concerned about the morality of future leaders. Well, why are you concerned about the morality of future leaders? Well, they're the ones that's going to be making decisions for our country and for other countries. But we can't wait till someone runs for president to start trying to fix the problems, our senator or congressman and so forth. If we really want to bring forth positive leaders, it starts at their youth. It starts with their very basic upbringing. Yes, it starts, as we will get to in the parenting manual, it actually starts even from within inside the womb. It's scientific studies proven that children can learn from within inside the womb. But getting past that even, imagine if a child was taught basic character education throughout their life, just as though they're taught reading, writing, and arithmetic. You're actually giving them the tools to solve problems, to have peaceful solution to the matter, to do things that would reduce fighting, war, confrontation. We could actually make a huge impact in educating alone. And in 12 years, if you were to start with K1, and 12 years later, you could produce a whole generation that's been through the school system of basic morality, character education. I didn't know I was supposed to bring my fly swatter tonight. That's what occurs in Texas when it's really hot and it's really humid, which is very rare. But continuing on, once again, if we want better leaders, we train them from their youth. We don't start when a person's 20. We don't start when they're 30. We start from their youth. But the next paragraph here, it says, it seems that all of our best efforts to guide our children in the right direction can be undone by just one bad movie, video game, or song. And, well, why is that? And is that a true statement? Well, we're finding out in society it's very true that one song, one movie, one video game can influence somebody enormously because they just don't listen to the song one time. They listen to the song repeatedly. They just don't watch a movie one time. I've met people that have watched Star Wars hundreds of times. And I've never understood that. It seems like once you watch the movie, you kind of understand what the movie's about, and it's done. But there's people that get so involved, it's like a fictional kind of life for them. The fiction becomes reality into some part of their mind. And then video games have proven to be something where there's many websites that have come out trying to help children who get so addicted they don't even sleep. They'll play video games 24 hours a day when they're out of school for the summer. And then getting back into the school year, they still find themselves addicted to where they're still playing them. As soon as they get home, sleep long enough to get back to school. And it's a very addictive thing. It's just like a drug. You can get so addicted that you can't make a sensible decision. And it's not just video games I'm talking about. It's negative character can be addictive. Negative character, doing things to where you feel like I don't have to be really responsible for it. Because that's one thing that's kind of murky when you look at it, so to speak. The results of negative character, you don't really see the results when you're committing negative choices. Like one of the situation scenarios we went over in one of the previous manuals was the young man that was drinking. And of course, later on, he ended up losing his life in a drunk driving accident. Well, you don't think about that when you're at the party drinking. And once you're in the accident, it's too late to reconsider. It's done. Well, we have to put it in the minds of the youth and adults to make the right decision before the consequence comes. Everybody regrets a negative choice once they're found. Whether it be you're standing, the most popular place you'll see negative choices, the results of them. And here in Abilene, we see them every day. And that's the mug shots they put on our local news websites here in Abilene. You always see a mug shot of someone every day. And I always thought that's what the result of a negative choice really looks like. Because a lot of those pictures, when you see, and sometimes you don't think about this, when you see a mug shot of a person, you're looking at a person that's getting ready, that has the potential of going away for many years. 5, 10, 15, 20, 30, 40. Their whole life has just evaporated into a very small room now. And they had potential the whole time. Well, where did this start? And what led to these choices? That's what we're wanting to evaluate, look at, and change. Notice here it says that these movies, songs, and, of course, video games, when coupled with peer pressure and the desire to conform, these influences are having a major impact on students of all ages. And there's two more words that, as teachers, we should be remembering, as we've already covered, is peer pressure and also influences. And if you remember, influences we covered on page 60 of the character unit, and peer pressure was on page 70. And when we get to the end of this, we're going to go back and look at a couple things to put it back into our minds before we move forward. But it says, in this lesson, speaking of chapter 5, students will learn how powerful influences can be in their life. You know, it's kind of like when a youth 16-year-old gets a really fast sports car. They don't really realize the magnitude of the power. You know, it's the difference between driving, you know, as they talk about Camaros. It's the difference between driving a Camaro that has a 2.0 four-cylinder or a Camaro that's an LT that has a Corvette motor. They both look pretty close to the same, and if you're not used to driving one compared to the other, you can find yourself in a very bad scene very quickly, because things move a lot faster in one than they do the other, even though they're both very capable of costing you your life. And I'm not just Camaro, that's the one I use. Sports car in general, or any car in general, has the potential. We see it with UTVs. Anything has the potential if it's not respected, and respect comes with being educated. But continuing on here, it says, they will also learn to apply self-control techniques to resist negative influences from a variety of sources. It is the goal of the Peaceful Solution Character Education Program to help children succeed. Together we can encourage, and that word together is a very key word. Together. That means we all have to be part of this together. It doesn't mean that you teach them positive things and you tell them, you know, stay away from watching negative things, and then me, when they come around me, oh, here, come watch this. You know, well, we were told not to watch that. That teaches, you know, to make negative choices. Oh, you're not going to get hurt by it. Just watch. It's funny. Well, people getting hurt isn't funny. People dying is not funny. People suffering is not funny. You know, it's kind of like I heard a teacher tell a student one time who walked over to the trash can in the cafeteria, and he didn't like his meal, and he took the whole meal and he just dumped it in the trash. And the teacher asked him, what was wrong? I don't like that. Well, you're not going to get anything else to eat today if you don't eat that. And now you've thrown it away. Well, I didn't like it. I'll do without. And the teacher said, do you know how many people would love to have what you just threw in the trash can? And we're seeing that even greater today, because in the news, we see enormous food shortages on the horizon. And everybody is talking about it. Not just baby formula, very staple products that we consume every day is going to be a challenge for us very soon. When you're growing products, you don't really see the products that wasn't planted until later on when it's time to harvest them. It's the same thing with character education. When you don't put this, you could call it a seed if you wanted to, when you don't put this in the mind of children, you don't really see the consequence immediately, but later on in life, you see the negative choices and the negative decisions they make, and they cost lives. They affect society. They affect everyone around them. But here it says, together, that's the key word, we can encourage our children to develop the consciousness to think and act in a way that will always be morally correct. So the key words we want to look at before we move forward, we discussed already, was influences, peer pressure. We talked about morality, and of course that dividing line. And we don't want to forget the VIP section that we had covered. So very quickly, this is just for your notes, and I want to read this to you. Where you see the word, values, because we talk about having values, and why do we talk about values? Well, Let me read to you what values are once again, get it into your mind, and then we'll go into what influences and why influences and values working together bring forth our character. But values, once again, we found on page 6 of the character unit. Now, that's the very first unit that we covered in this series. It's the first of 5 in the junior high series. And this is on page 6. And, of course, values, it says values are what you believe in or feel strongly about. They also, notice, play a key role in the development of your character. The sum total of everything you value becomes your value system. And then for your notes, looking over to page 13 of that character unit, and you're looking down below because you have a paragraph on top, paragraph on bottom, and I'll show you very quickly here. We're looking here at the very bottom. Oh, we're really zoomed in there. We're looking right in here around the bottom in the highlighted area. And it says, having morals is an important way to define your character. And we're going to go back and cover what morals are once again, because remember we're talking about values, and valuing morals is where we're going to. Moral values set boundaries that help you to demonstrate appropriate behavior toward others. So notice it not only gets your mind thinking, but it actually puts it into your action. It helps you to demonstrate these things. In other words, when a person has moral values, so this is something that they deem as to be important, and morals are rules, he tries to distinguish, or she tries to distinguish between right and wrong, and makes choices that are respectful and thoughtful of others according to his or her ability. And we're all working at different levels. I know people that are a lot smarter than me that can make better decisions a lot faster. So when you think about this, and don't forget the section we have here, and of course, remember that dividing line between right and wrong. And this is page 8 of the character unit. And notice it says morals. We talked about values. We talked about moral values. And remember, these morals are rules. And of course, it says morals. What do they have to do with my character? Once again on page 8. And it said, regardless of culture, religion, or environment, there are some values that all people share. They're called moral values. So this means you can live in the United States, you can live in Syria, Palestine, Russia, China, Taiwan, North Korea, South Korea. You can live in Pakistan or you can live in India. And we're talking about people that are being very confrontational to each other, that have a history of being confrontational. But when it boils down to this decision making, everyone agrees that these moral values should be kept unless they're not controlling their thought toward another person. In other words, we would think, well, Americans shouldn't kill Americans. Uvalde should not take place. I think we all agree with that. I would hope everyone would agree. What we see in Uvalde, Philadelphia, Buffalo, other areas, no, that this should not take place. What takes place in Chicago on a weekly basis should not take place. But in the very same instance, what takes place with Ukraine right now? What takes place with Syria right now, who is still a nation where other nations are stealing their oil? You can say Libya, who is still a nation where countries are coming in and stealing their oil. Why the people who live in those countries suffer, they live in poverty, why people take their wealth away from them. That's not something I would say is morally correct. But if it was done here in the United States, what would we say? Well, very negative things said about the young man in Uvalde. I'm not defending him in any which way, shape, or form. The young man in Chicago, young men in Chicago, there's multiple in Chicago over Memorial Day weekend, young men in Buffalo, and so on. These are very negative actions, but why do we value, or why do we look at it differently when we feel like it's our enemy we're doing it to? Why is it not okay to kill this person, but it's okay to kill these people? How is that morally correct? Well, they're our enemy. Well, why are they our enemy? And I want you to consider, as we continue to read through, a lot of people, and it goes along with racism also, as we talked about in the acceptance unit, hate is taught. Racism is taught. These things are taught to other people. People make very negative choices. They say very negative things about a group of people or a society of people due to what they've been taught. And, well, how are they taught these things? That's where we're going to start going tonight. How are they taught these things? Parents walking around going, and I've seen this about the young man in Uvalde, the grandfather going, I'd have never guessed this. I would have never seen it coming. You know, I don't think the grandmother probably thought she was going to get shot in the face. And you see it time and time again with these shootings that take place. I remember other school shootings, especially like, one of the most popular ones that I can remember was the Columbine school shooting. And a lot of those parents became motivational speakers, just like Sandy Hook. They became motivational speakers to try to help others that are going through the same thing. And you could imagine how much we're failing as a society when a parent loses a child in a school shooting and they can actually make it a full-time job helping others. And I'm not saying they're taking advantage. I'm just saying when the need is so great that they can actually help many other people to where their time is consumed with assisting other people because their children were killed too, we're not making an environment better. We're still letting something lead our children astray. Something is getting into their minds, these influences and this peer pressure and this conformity, this lack of moral aptitude, so to speak, this lack of moral desire to behave properly, to keep the rules, to benefit society is missing. Well, continuing on, it says people from all walks of life, young or old, big or small, rich or poor, share some of these basic concepts of moral values. Now, remember here, continuing on, it says moral principles in regard to human life means acknowledging and accepting that life is valuable and all people, that's all people, have the potential to contribute to society. When you have a moral attitude toward others, you accept and appreciate that they have the right to live in peace, safety, and security. You can demonstrate a moral attitude by being respectful toward all people. Yes, not just toward those who are your allies, not just as, well, we'll join NATO and we'll have a lot of friends and we won't like Russia or China because they're not our friends. There's divisions in some of the most powerful groups you'll see in society. There's divisions. And very powerful indeed. You're talking about people that control weaponry that could make or break a country very quickly. And these countries know this. That's why they're willing to retaliate very quickly. But remember, we talked about values, and we're going to talk about influences. And we talked about these rules, these morals, and if you value these rules, how we can make society a better place. But of course, the challenge that we face in society are the influences and the peer pressure that's around us. And if you remember on page 60 of the character unit, we learned that influences are all around us. And it says your values play a key role in developing your character. You must be aware of how influences affect the things that are important to you. An influence is something that has the ability to affect your attitude, way of thinking, feeling, and behaving. So that's what an influence is. It can actually change the way you perceive something. You used to like this, and now you like this. There's nothing wrong with, well, I used to like chocolate ice cream better, but, every time I think I like vanilla better. Nothing wrong with that. But there is something wrong when, I used to think he's my friend, but now I hate his guts. Well, what went wrong? What broke down? Continuing on about influences, it says, how you are influenced can affect what you value. Very important, because remember, a value is something you deem important, something you take care of, you watch over, you protect it. Well, these influences can affect what you value or motivate you to create new values. So it's not always bad, can be positive, like the peaceful solution. We try through education to get people to start valuing their character and, of course, recognize the influences that are around them. And it says influences can come in all different sizes. They can be positive or negative, subtle or bold. But the one thing that they all have in common is they have the ability to affect what you value and affect your character in both a positive or negative way. And of course, with your values and the influences that's around you, remember this on page 74 that we've seen. Remember, value plus influences, well, they equal our character. And putting those things together, remember these building blocks of character, one thing being put on another, and we have to really look at it that simplistic. What we value, does it bring harm to ourselves, someone else, or the environment? If it does, we really need to reconsider about thinking that's something that we would want to partake of or look at in a positive way. And I've learned in life that you can look at some things in a positive way, and after receiving education, you realize, that's pretty damaging. I used to be a person that used to love certain types of music. And then when you get to read the lyrics and learn the lyrics, you start going, wow, that's not something I would want my children doing. I sure wouldn't want anybody in society doing this. It would be very destructive to do something like this. And, after listening and realizing these things, me personally, it just gets to the point to where I just really don't want to listen to it anymore. It's not really something I want to be part of my character. I don't want to be thinking this way. And if I go around singing it all day, it's the same way I learned my ABCs. I'm going to be putting things in my mind that I really don't believe should be done. But here on page 74 of the character unit, it says, being aware of what you value means, notice, carefully considering, not impulsively, but carefully considering what you are allowing yourself to be influenced by. For instance, someone who views a lot of violent movies and video games and listens to songs with lyrics that depict violence will begin to value aggression as a way to solve their problems. A person who values friends above all else will be easily influenced to do things that they know are wrong just to fit in. Never forget chapter 4 of the acceptance unit, where we go through the steps to evaluate someone becoming a friend. Those are very important things to always keep bringing back into the minds, because once again, what are you evaluating? You're evaluating their values, the way they influence you, the peer pressure they apply to you, and their character in general. Those are the things we're looking at. We're not, examining whether they wear the nicest shirt, the nicest shoes, have the latest, greatest haircut, do the latest, greatest trends. That's not something that we're really looking at. We're talking about choices and choices of character. Now, you can tie in the way someone dresses with choices of character, but right now we're concerned more with this intake of influences and peer pressure that they apply to other people. And once again, it says here, if you repeatedly watch acts of violence of any kind, these actions are recorded in the library of your mind. Later, even after many years, these can come back in instant replay, and you can find yourself doing the very things seen so long ago. This has proven true to me, because I can drive down the road in Texas in the summertime. People love to turn their music up, roll their windows down. And many times I've heard going down the road songs that I have not heard since high school, which would be the late 80s, early 90s. And instantaneously, every lyric of that song can come back to my mind. And it can be 20, 30 years since I've heard this. And it can come back very quickly. Wasn't even thinking about it until the car pulls up beside of you, and then immediately it's right there. It just goes to show how powerful the mind is, and how great of a database the mind is, and how we really pull our decision making off what we allow to be fed into our mind. It's just like if you have a computer, and let's say you want to do a PowerPoint program or a PowerPoint presentation. You buy a computer, but you didn't buy Microsoft Office, and you don't have PowerPoint on your computer. No matter how bad you want your computer to put together a PowerPoint presentation, you're not going to get it to go together, not with PowerPoint anyway. You have to obtain it, and then you have to learn how to use it. And it's the same thing with the information we obtain in our mind. We can only make decisions off of what we allow to be put into our mind. Once again, this programming, this influences, this peer pressure we're talking about, the values we have, and of course the rules that we either think are or are not important. A lot of people think breaking the rules are the right thing to do until the rules are broken and it affects them. And then people usually stand against it fairly well. Once again, I bring to your mind, why is it not okay to shoot 19 children in Uvalde and 2 teachers, but it's okay to bomb young people in other countries? We tend to think when we shoot that $100 million missile at a $50,000 concrete building that only guilty people die. And innocent people are free from all of the harmful effects of war. That's a very deceptive way of thinking too. But those thoughts can enter the mind and can reason it to be, it's okay, when it's really not. I encourage people to watch some documentaries. I've already I recommended White Light, Black Rain. That's the effects of what took place in Japan with the atomic bombs. Watch what people have to say that lived through it. Nobody's bragging about it, and nobody wants to experience it again. But here, once again, on page 74, the character unit, it said, we are all bombarded with negative influences every day. Some things we have control over, some things we don't. It's up to us to make sure we are allowing positive influences in and rejecting and keeping out the negative ones. And remember, when it comes to these influences, we're told to never underestimate the power of these influences and the role they play on our character. And then if you turn over very quickly, and this is just to get into our minds as teachers, because we're getting into maintaining our self-control, and what we're covering right now has a huge effect on what we're covering in Chapter 5. We talked about the emotions, the anger, and how to govern them, but we're really going to get into how these things get fed into the mind. And it's really more than the people around us, but it has a lot to do with the people around us. And you can't control what I watch or listen to. I can't control what you watch or listen to. But we can control whether we choose to be around each other, whether we choose to allow each other to affect our values or to affect the way that we think or consider things. Somebody might consider never doing something wrong in a certain instance. But after dealing with someone who they really want to be a friend with, would think, well, I think, and they'll actually start going through and something they know is wrong. They know it's not right to do. Through the reasoning in their mind, it becomes, well, in this instant right here, it will be okay. It would be wrong in that instant, but in this instant, it would be okay. Yeah, this is the situation where it's okay. I'm supposed to overlook a fault. That's what I'm supposed to do. Well, there's nothing wrong with overlooking someone making a bad choice one time, but still, you have to evaluate the situation and realize that a person has to change. They have to work on changing. You can't continually make one bad choice after another. Eventually, the consequences catch up, and the end result is usually death. We have to learn that change is a very important part of bringing peace to society. But once again, here on page 70, it's entitled Peer Power from the character unit. And it says, as you get older, you rely on your friends more for companionship and acceptance. It's nice to be around others who are fun and share similar interests and personality traits as you. Having friends is great, but friends can also influence each other in negative ways. And remember what an influence is. It's something or someone that has the ability to change the way we think, feel, or act. Well, here's the problem. If your friends accentuate the negative and not the positive traits in their character and encourage you to do the same, they are influencing you in a negative way. This is called negative peer pressure. Negative peer pressure can come in different forms. For instance, your friend has cigarettes and offers you one. You say, no thanks, and he says, come on, everybody smokes. Even if he did not directly tell you to smoke, his response can pressure you into thinking you will be an oddball if you don't. And here's another example. Your friend tells you she's going to the mall to shoplift a necklace from the mall. And if you're really her friend, you will come with her to be a lookout. In this case, you are being pressured to make a bad choice to keep your friendship. The power of peers to influence the way we think and act should not be underestimated. So ask yourself, how can negative peer pressure affect your character, and decide in advance what you will say when approached with any negative request. Now, with all those things in mind, keep in mind that the only person we can control is ourselves. And we really want to tie these things together and make sure that we have a firm foundation solidified with everything we've covered, and identifying that the choice is ours. But when you have 20 people in a classroom, or 1,000 people in a school, or 100,000 people in a city, You can't control what all of those people do. Everyone gets to choose what they want to watch, what they want to listen to, the video games they play, and whether or not they even care about education. I've been places in certain countries, and I've met people that have never been to a school system that can't read, write, but they get through life and every day, but they don't know the very basics of what all the signs say around us. And this very basic knowledge that's given as you drive down the road or interact with other people, they're not able to comprehend that. And you think about how much of a society, how much they're missing from society. And if you've never had the privilege of flying to a country, getting off the plane, and everything you see is in a different language. Well, now we have Google Camera where you can hold your camera up and it'll translate it for you. So you have those things that are available to you. But doesn't always work. We've been in situations before to where you rely on this great technology that we have, and just to find out later on when you're in the other country, your internet's not working. So your great technology left you very fast. So once again, if you learn the language, you're a lot better off, right? But if you don't learn it, you're going to have to rely on something else. And I find it very difficult to learn English, much less trying to learn other languages. I find it to be very complicated. I would have spent more time as a young person learning those things than trying to do them now. But just like with the choices we make in character, there's no way I can go back to being 15, 16, 17, 13. It just doesn't work that way. One thing you don't get back is time. And in society, the time to improve things, it's really slipping away every day. If it's not getting better, it's getting worse. And eventually it will get to the point where we're going to see something horrific. And you would hope that something horrific doesn't have to take place before people will slam the brakes on and stop and look and think we're not doing something right. But sadly, we can see with what's going on in society, there's going to be something horrific that's going to have to take place to shake something up. And you think about the school shootings or the shootings that we've had here in the United States, that's some pretty horrific stuff. But when Uvalde took place, they were putting the shooting about Sandy Hook back on the TV because people had forgotten it. And you tend to think, well, in 10 years, what will people remember about Uvalde? Will we forget the horror that took place, like with Sandy Hook, like with Columbine? Do we forget those things? Do we forget the horror that took place in Japan in the 1940s, where people literally had their flesh burned off their skin? Do we forget those things? As a society, we tend to only remember the things that affect us in the here and now. Well, there's going to be a lot of here and now for all of us if we don't make a better choice. We can all go to Walmart, Lowe's, Home Depot, Target, throw any store in there. But just like how we cannot control what other people watch, what other people listen to, the things other people do, when you go to the store, you can't control what other people, the actions they're going to commit. If you're in a store and somebody decides, I'm going to shoot up the store, all you can do is react to the choice that they're making. You can't change the choice. All you can do is react to it. Sometimes people have been talked out of things, but sadly, many times a lot of people die. So here, turning over, looking at the lesson plan, and it's very important to remember the things we discussed because it's going to play a huge role as we go into the next classes with William and then Catan, picking up on these things. The information that will be given, it has to be individualized, pointing the finger at ourselves, but also looking back at society and realizing how are we contributing to society? How are the choices we make affecting others around us? And we can't go through and say, you can or can't do this. You have to show people why you should or shouldn't do this. Telling people they can't do it usually creates a society of people that want to do it because they can't do it. And I've always heard people say, if you want me to do something, tell me I can't do it. That'll set a new goal for me, and I kind of laugh at it because it's, well, usually if you tell somebody they can't do something, they probably shouldn't do it. I'm not talking about you can't climb Mount Everest. Well, I'm going to go do it to prove everybody wrong. No, you can't do something because it's negative. Well, here on LP5C, first thing we always start out with is our purpose and objective. And it says students will learn how to, like these flies and how much they're influencing me up here at this class. I feel like I'm being pushed with buttons on every corner. Once again, purpose and objective. Students will learn how influences can affect their ability to maintain their self-control. They will also learn how to apply self-control to distinguish between positive and negative influences. Remember, those are the things that are important to them. The things that, those values, remember the values plus influences, but influences, that's something that has the ability to change the way they think, feel, and act. Don't forget the values that go with it, because that's how they deem it to be important. And those two things put together on page 74 of the character unit, we realized and we've learned that determines our character, whether it's positive or negative. So they will learn how to apply self-control to distinguish between positive and negative influences and to not let others bring them down to their level. Now, of course, you see the materials here that are needed, and you have Student's Handbook. Audio cassette player. Well, once again, if you get the PDFs of our books, you'll find that audio cassettes, I'm sure for the young people that are asking, what is that? They would know it as probably MP4s or MP3s. We have the files actually embedded to the PDF, so when you get to the section where the audio needs to be played, all you have to do is click it. It's already embedded into the PDF folder. So when we send you the book, you automatically get the files that go along with it. And of course, then you have the teacher's manual, audio lesson cassette tape, which they're now MP4s or MP3s, and they're embedded into the book itself. Well, the first procedure of every lesson plan is always review the previous lesson, or if it's chapter 1, you review the previous book. But here we're reviewing the previous lesson. And of course, the previous chapter that we read was chapter 4, and it was applying self-control to interaction and communication. And notice we're going to do this by asking students the following questions. And the very first one is, what is necessary for communication to be successful? Let me get my book here, because we're going to turn back. If you remember, now we went through the What I Had Learned section last class, and of course, half of it, and then to go through the other half, David covered it in the class before the last one. But over on page 90, you know, there's this secret recipe that is needed. And on page 90, and it's in the center of the page, it's the second paragraph, and it says, for communication to be successful, not just to communicate, you can yell, scream, and shout, but we're talking about successful communication. For communication to be successful, there must be a speaker and a listener. One person must give information, and the other person must be willing and able to receive the information. Both aspects of communication, the giving and the receiving, require self-control. Now, this we think can be done through speaking, but remember the two most common forms of communication are oral and written. And in today's society, that written can be a textbook or it can be a text on the phone. A text or a message, any form of message. You know, and I have WhatsApp, and I have an enormous amount of people overseas that I talk to. And when you're getting messages from all around the world, it's very easy to lose conversations. And it's a challenge, and I still haven't found out. I would like for WhatsApp to create something, or some platform to create something so you could better keep up with the conversations that are coming in very quickly. But as of yet, I haven't found one. If anyone knows one, please message it to the Peaceful Solution. We need it greatly, and that you can always have that, because if you only have a listener, or you only have a speaker, you can't have a conversation that builds things. If someone sends a message and you never really get to see the message, or you see the message and then when you go to reply, it's all the way down through and you have 10 more that have come in and you're trying to figure out, well, who was it that asked the question? And you're trying to figure it out because you've got so much going on. You know, it's rude for someone to ask a question and you not answer their question. You know, and you don't want to be that way. You want to find a way to communicate better, because feelings can be hurt when someone's always the speaker and never the listener. Everybody wants to be heard, and if you want to be heard, you should also be willing to listen, and that requires self-control. And that even takes place in text, where people ignore the messages coming in and they're only texting what else they have to say. And I've seen that take place many times where people are not even reading messages from other people. They're just blowing up their phones with messages because they're upset, they're frustrated, and they're really not doing anything that's productive other than expressing what they feel. Nothing wrong with getting it off your chest in the proper way. But here, going back to LP5C, we also see one of the reviews, the B, the question that we're to ask our students. What should you do if you find yourself in a conflict and the other person is disrespectful and on the verge of losing control? Well, remember on page 106 and 107, we talked about that. And of course, we have the RESPOND acronym that also goes along with that. And remember, in the RESPOND acronym is something through practice, repetition, is something we can get into our minds. And remember the RESPOND acronym: to remain calm, evaluate the situation, stay objective, practice being polite, overcome the desire to retaliate, negate the negative, and then determine. Determine in your mind, setting your mind in advance to maintain positive communication. And once again, that should bring to your mind page 80 of the character unit, where we talked about what it means to set our mind in advance. And remember, over on page 106, we read here in the second paragraph that when you're in a conflict where someone is on the brink of losing control, so they're right there on the very edge of it, it's up to you to not allow their behavior to influence the way you respond. This can be very difficult to do. You know, sometimes we can diffuse through how we react to something that is said. You can diffuse the situation. And people that are in customer service, as I mentioned before, they're trained in these things, on how to diffuse a situation, because when you're a business and you have people that customer service, usually is just dealing with complaints a lot of times. Sometimes it's just questions, but a lot of times, from what I've talked to big corporation, customer service usually deals with enormous amounts of complaints. And one thing I found interesting was they look at it as, well, this is money to us. We're paying these people by the hour, not by the phone call. So we train them to get past the complaining and get to the problem as fast as they can, because that is how we increase productivity in answering questions and solving problems. So they say a lot of times the job is to let the people express themselves. Whatever's on their chest, let them get it off their chest, because until they do it, you're not going to deal with it. And after they get it off their chest, you address it and how you can fix it, and then you work towards fixing it. And I thought that was it's a pretty smart way to do things, and we need to really do that in society. Stop arguing about things and start fixing things. Arguments doesn't solve problems. Arguments just prolong the solving of a problem. And if you've never experienced that, you will one day in life. And you'll learn, after all the arguing is done, after all the expressing of someone is over, you still have the problem to deal with. And true leaders, they take hold of the situations, and that's what we're all training to be. We want to be true, positive leaders. They take hold of situations, and they deal with them in a positive way. And we're all working towards being, that leader that everyone can look to. And I know a whole group of people around the world that are truly wanting to be positive leaders, not just for somebody to look up to, but so they can make a better place in society for not only themselves, but for their children and generations to come. So looking here, I want to close out with this. I'm going to leave Procedure 2. William will pick up on Procedure 2, but I want to read you an article really quick, and it's about these influences. And remember the speaking and listening, what we were talking about here. It requires someone to give the information and someone to receive the information. Well, this was a study that was done here not long ago. It was printed. It was published in March 15th of 2022. And this is from Health News, which was from U.S. News. And it says here, the headline, and I'll show it to you here. It says, suicide rate is spiking upwards in pre-adolescent children. Now, suicide rate in teenagers is already extremely high, but it's spiking. That means the extremely high rate we already had is hitting new levels. We worry about gas prices going up. We worry about food prices going up. We should really be worried about the young people in our society committing suicide, because that rate is spiking, as they say. It says in the past 2 decades, a growing number of preteens have taken medicines or other chemical ways as a way to end their life. A new research warns. So it's not, you think of the suicide, we always think of shooting or the really graphic of slicing something. Well, no, they're not just doing that anymore. It's the medication that's found in the house. You can lock up the gun and you can hide the knives, but what do you do with the chemicals? Children are doing some very horrific things. I've even read about children that were drinking chemicals that were meant for cleaning plumbing pipes, and it was destroying them and killing themselves. Well, in closing out here, I want to read you this last part. It says, the mental health of children has become a big talking point in the light of the pandemic, but the study data showed the problems has been percolating for years. It's on the rise. There has been a 4.5 increase in suicidal ingestion cases among children between the ages of 10 and 12 in the last 20 years. So it's went up 4.5 times. And these are children that are ingesting poison to take their own lives. Now, that's horrific. But my question, and the reason I read that to you, is in 10 or 12 years, what have these children experienced? What is the influence? What is taking place in their lives that are leading to decisions being made when their lives are just beginning? These children aren't even getting to middle school. They're only so far out of, not being able to walk and talk. And they're taking their own lives that quickly. Well, we're going to cover those things, and the Peaceful Solution is going to discuss it a lot more in detail on how we can make better choices with education, with giving people the right tools to make the right choice. So our next class we're going to pick up will be this coming Wednesday. It'll be June the 8th. And once again, it'll be at 5:30. And William will be picking up on Procedure 2 of Chapter 5 of the Self-Control Unit. Thank you once again for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you again very soon.